Number 21. Sativa Tran Sue. Instead of going to visit her family in Spokane, Washington for Thanksgiving back in 2021, 26-year-old Sativa Tran Sue decided to vacation in Cancun at the request of her boyfriend, 31-year-old Taylor Allen. Sativa's loved ones suspected that something was off about Taylor after meeting him 2.5 years before. They thought he was too controlling and later claimed that he monitored her cell phone carefully. Allen also allegedly became explosively angry when he drank alcohol. The family begged Sativa to move back home countless times, but she was an adult, so they had no choice but to respect her choices. At first, it seemed like the Mexico vacation was going well, but the young woman's loved ones became worried when Sativa's friends told them the young woman said she needed stitches after a fight. Earlier that day, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Sativa told her close friends that Allen had already drunk 7 shots and 2 pina coladas in one day. When the family couldn't reach Sativa after hearing about the stitches, they became even more frightened. Her mother, Jamie Beaulieu, told the Daily Beast that from what she knew, Allen had threatened to jump from the 4th floor balcony of the couple's hotel room. The next morning, Beaulieu got a phone call from the U.S. consulate telling her that Sativa was dead. A hotel housekeeper discovered her body. Her family members said it looked like she had been beaten to a bloody pulp. Allen was quickly arrested for murder and held in a Mexican jail for the crime. There have been no updates since late 2021, leaving the status of this case unclear. Based on what Sativa's family has told the media, she enjoyed visiting Mexico often, but in this case, she caved into pressure from Allen to go there instead of celebrating Thanksgiving with family. Have you ever felt torn between your partner and your family? Tell us about it in the comments below. Number 20. John Reid. For centuries, legends and rumors of lost civilizations have drawn curious foreigners into the vast and mysterious Amazon wilderness. Sadly, not everyone has made it back alive. In 1980, a 28-year-old man named John Reid traveled from Twin Oaks, California to Brazil in search of a fabled underground lost city known as Acacor. A well-known jungle guide named Tatunka Nara told Reid that he was the chief of an ancient tribe that once inhabited Acacor for over 3,000 years. Reid's plan was to join Tatunka Nara on one of the searches for Acacor that he often hosted. It was how the guide made a living after all, and Reid thought that maybe they would actually find the city together. Many people who went on Nara's excursions didn't necessarily buy into all the stories about Acacor, but it was a good way to see a glimpse of the Amazon up close and personal. Others, like Reid, invested fully in the belief that Acacor was out there somewhere and that it was just a matter of finding the missing ancient metropolis. He went into the rainforest with Nara one day though and never re-emerged. While Reid's fate is still uncertain, Tatunka Nara was eventually outed as a total fraud. He was actually a German national named Günther Hauck, and there was no truth to his outlandish stories at all. Even more disturbingly, Reid was one of 3 people who vanished while in his company. In 1984, 4 years after the young man went missing, a 24-year-old Swiss man named Herbert Wanner also disappeared during an outing with the fake guide. Only his jawbone was discovered 2 years later, but the nature of his death remains a mystery. Again, 3 years after that, in 1987, a Swedish yoga instructor named Christine Häuser became the next tourist victim to disappear while with Tatunka Nara. At least 2 other tourists were also rumored to have vanished during guided excursions with the phony chief. Tatunka, or Günther Hauck, or whatever you decide to call him, denied any and all involvement in the strange disappearances. He claimed that John Reid and Herbert Wanner ran off into the jungle against his warnings when he tried to put an end to their searches for Acacor, and that he watched Christine Häuser get on a ferry to Manaus and never saw her again. Hauck had an unsettling history of legal trouble, dating back at least as far as the mid-1960s when he was deported back to Germany from South America and thrown in jail for not paying child support. When German authorities found his money-making scheme in Brazil, they tried to warn as many tourists as they could that he was a fraud. They even flew Hauck's ex-wife to the village of Barcelos, where he was living at the time, and had her confirm that he was, in fact, Günther Hauck. But people believe what they want to believe, and Houck's engrossing yet fake tales held up at least until 1991, when filmmakers secretly recorded footage of themselves tripping up his story during an excursion. They made a documentary putting Houck fully on blast, and at some point afterward he seems to have fallen into obscurity, probably for the best. Number 19. Ildar Rahmatullah. In 2023, 38-year-old Ildar Rahmatullah left Mississauga, Canada, and headed for the South Pacific to go on the vacation of a lifetime. He made plans to stop in multiple different countries, but he never made it. In early April, the curious traveler arrived in Fiji after going to New Zealand. He checked out of his hotel a few days later and never made it to his next planned destination, Malaysia. In fact, he hasn't been seen at all since. Rahmatullah often spoke with his mother on the phone about every 3 days or so. She hasn't heard from him in multiple months now, and she's left without answers as she tries to navigate the situation from Russia. Her missing son's phone was discovered on the beach, but his suitcase, backpack, and other belongings are still missing. Authorities have conducted dives and searched extensively on land, but have found no trace of the vacationer. In the months since Rahmatullah vanished, his loved ones have expressed their sincere frustrations over their interactions with authorities, who they feel are not taking the case seriously. Neither Fijian nor Canadian officials have said whether there's a record of him leaving Fiji. For now, his location remains a mystery, as his friends and family try to get to the bottom of what happened to him. Number 18. Christy Chen. Christy Chen married 38-year-old Bradley Robert Dawson back in 2022 after a whirlwind, passionate romance. Only 3 months after they first met, the 36-year-old pharmacist from Tennessee and her new husband went to Fiji for their honeymoon, where they stayed at a $3,500 per night suite at the luxurious upscale Turtle Island resort. The bride's parents paid for the trip as a generous gift to the newlywed couple. During the second night of their trip, the pair were seen drinking heavily and fighting. According to a witness, Chen was angry at Dawson for flirting and dancing with other women after they'd just gotten married. They went back to their suite, where the loud noises of arguments continued for a while before suddenly going silent after a thud and a loud scream. One woman who overheard later said that it sounded like someone in the room was probably drunk and unable to control themselves. The next day, a hotel butler discovered Christie's badly beaten body between the wall and the toilet. Dawson was no longer anywhere at the resort. 2 days later, he was located several miles away at Matakawalevu Island, where he had kayaked after the fight with Christie. Authorities believe he was planning to catch a boat to mainland Fiji and was going to try escaping the country from there. In Dawson's possession, police found money, his passport, both his and Christie's IDs, and visa cards belonging to Christie. Interestingly, he left his GPS watch behind, probably so that his location couldn't be traced. Dawson claimed that Christie's death was simply an accident, but investigators didn't buy this story considering the extent of her injuries. He was arrested for murder shortly after. Speaking with ABC News from the jail in Fiji, where he's still being held, Dawson said that Chen was his everything and that their fights had never turned physical in the past. He claimed he left the island in a kayak in an attempt to de-escalate their disagreement that night. Dawson's ex-girlfriend, Kristen Baker, painted a different picture of the man in the hot seat. During an interview with People magazine, she said that he was a different person when he drank. He allegedly had a habit of blacking out and not remembering what he did the next day. Baker also described Dawson as having expensive taste and wanting all of the finer things in life, and she said he always had an obsession with going to Fiji. As of early 2023, Dawson was denied bail thanks to concerns that he was a flight risk. Number 17. Dustin Jackson. A father of 5 from Utah and his wife were waiting for their return flight back to the US from Cancun at the end of a Valentine's trip in 2022 when he decided to buy some chewing tobacco. 36-year-old Dustin Jackson called a taxicab to go to a nearby convenience store, but it didn't have what he was looking for, so he asked the driver to take him somewhere else. The last thing he remembered before blacking out was getting out of the car and getting hit by something. Jackson said he left for the store around 10 o'clock in the morning. When he woke up in a ditch a few hours later with a welt on the back of his head, it was dark outside. His shoulder, leg, and foot were heavily injured, and a few of his teeth were broken. Someone had even hacked Jackson with a blade to the point of almost completely detaching his shoulder before stealing both his cell phone and credit card. He had no idea where he was, but he could tell it was a run-down neighborhood in the middle of the desert. During an interview with Fox News after his rescue, Jackson said that the first police officers he approached refused to help him out. He said he eventually met someone who helped him. The officer administered first aid to his injuries and drove him to the airport, where he realized that his wife had taken their scheduled flight home. Without a cell phone, wallet, or the ability to speak Spanish, Jackson was stranded. He couldn't buy a new plane ticket and claimed that airport staff made him get out of a wheelchair he was using because he wasn't a customer with any money. Thankfully, an American traveler whose flight had been cancelled stepped in to help when she noticed Jackson in trouble. He got in touch with his wife, who wired money for a hotel room and a plane ticket to him. Surgeons in the US spent months trying to repair his shoulder, which now has an artificial joint in place of the real one, which was fully destroyed. Jackson still suffers permanent nerve damage and can no longer work as a contractor thanks to his injuries. After news of the attack broke out, the Mexican Attorney General announced that an investigation was underway. As of now, it's unclear where it stands. Number 6. Desiree Gibbon. Desiree Gibbon was undeniably beautiful. She worked as a model and competed in beauty pageants starting from an early age while growing up in Queens, New York. But as she came into her mid-20s, she decided to pursue a different career path on the other side of the camera. Her dream was to go to film school in Europe and make documentaries. To save money, Desiree went to Jamaica in late 2017 to find work as a bartender. She planned to stay there for a month at a bed and breakfast owned by her grandparents. From what her family back in the US could tell, she was enjoying the exotic trip. Then, just a few days before she was scheduled to go back to New York, she was discovered brutally murdered in some bushes on the side of a country road. Desiree's body was covered in bruises, and her throat had been sliced. She was last seen leaving the bed and breakfast late at night 3 days before, and nothing seemed wrong. Strangely, she left behind her purse and her local cell phone, but took her American cell phone. The American phone has never been found, and anytime Desiree's family tried to call, it went straight to voicemail. Yet it was this same phone that the young woman's aunt, Peggy Brunner, received a call from just 2 months after Desiree's murder. All she could hear on the other end was heavy breathing, and when she tried to call back, the phone didn't work. A few hours later, Peggy received a second missed call from her deceased niece's number. Again, she had no luck when trying to call back. At the time of Desiree's death, Jamaica was struggling against a large spike in murders. Her mother, Andrea Callie Gibbon, suspects that her daughter either saw something or found something out that she wasn't supposed to know, and that someone killed her to keep her quiet. It's possible that Desiree was lured to her death by someone she knew, especially since nothing seemed wrong when she was leaving the bed and breakfast. But until or unless more information comes to light, nobody can say for sure what happened. Number 15. Poisoned in Paradise. As the end of 2018 slowly crept up, Casey McPherson Pomeroy and his wife Barbara welcomed a group of friends from the United States into their home on the Caribbean island of Anguilla for the new year. Among the guests were Casey's childhood friends, Caleb Guillory and Chuck Gross, as well as the men's wives. On the night before New Year's Eve, one of the group members called the police and reported a medical emergency at the McPherson Pomeroy's home. By the time authorities arrived, Caleb Guillory was already dead on the living room floor. Casey McPherson Pomeroy was suffering from extreme seizures and later died at the hospital. The medical examiner concluded that both men overdosed on cocaine and a drug called methylene dioxyamphetamine, or MDA for short. On Casey's death certificate, the official causes were listed as pulmonary edema, cardiac toxicity, cardiac ischemia, hypothermia, and seizures. Caleb's causes of death were asphyxiation, strangulation, both ligature and manual, multiple blunt force traumas, and seizures. Barbara McPherson Pomeroy told investigators that she, Casey, and Caleb went to a beach bar earlier that night. They ordered a single rum and coke and left it sitting on the bar unattended while they stepped away to look for her husband's missing flip-flop. The trio then grabbed the drink and brought it home with them without a second thought, where they all sipped from it and got sick, including Barbara, who survived the mysterious poisoning. Authorities questioned the truthfulness of Barbara's story, which allegedly kept changing, and the victims' families quickly grew suspicious about what really happened. Neither Casey nor Caleb were known to take drugs, and all 4 surviving members of the group lawyered up after being held for questioning for multiple days. They've since returned to the United States and refused to go back to Anguilla to share information about what they know. 3 years after the deaths, the victims' families told the media that they were still looking for answers about what really happened to Caleb and Casey. Sadly, the case remains at a standstill today. Number 14. Robin Corky and Annie Corky. In the Indian Ocean off East Africa, the Seychelles archipelago contains 115 islands filled with pristine beaches, lush rainforests, and rare wildlife. During month-long African vacation back in 2016, 42-year-old Robin Corky and 37-year-old Annie Corky stayed at the luxury 2,000 per night Maya Luxury Resort. The American sisters had already visited Kenya, Tanzania, and Zanzibar during what was meant to be the getaway of a lifetime. 6 nights into their stay in the Seychelles, a butler at their resort helped a woman to their room towards the end of the night. The next day, staff members noticed a strange lack of activity coming from the room. They knocked on the door, but nobody responded. Employees expressed their concerns to the local police, who entered the room and discovered Annie and Robin dead. According to reports, there were no signs of foul play or illegal drugs in the room. There were also no obvious injuries on the bodies of either women. Autopsies ruled that both sisters died from a buildup of fluid in their lungs called acute pulmonary edema. The medical examiner also said that Annie suffered a swelling of the brain, known as a cerebral edema. Both sisters were in good health before their trip, leaving one question remaining: what triggered their fatal symptoms? A few months later, a police report concluded that Annie and Robin died accidentally from a lethal combination of codeine, morphine, and alcohol. Number 13. Gareth Crowe. During a family trip to Thailand's Koh Samui Island back in 2016, 36-year-old Gareth Crowe and his teenage stepdaughter decided to go on an elephant trekking expedition together. His partner, Catherine Hughes, and her son chose to stay behind. Crowe and his stepdaughter, Ailey Hughes, were riding on the same elephant when the animal suddenly got mad and threw them off its back. The elephant then gored Crowe to death and, in the process, injured Ailey, who survived with serious injuries. Witnesses claimed that the elephant, who was named Golf, seemed upset and was misbehaving before the attack even started. He wouldn't listen to his handler, who hit him several times and eventually erupted into a full-blown rage. After rushing at Crowe, the elephant ran off into the woods nearby. There were rumors that Crowe antagonized Golf before the elephant charged at him, but Ailey denied these claims. Speaking with a Thai interviewer from her hospital bed, she insisted that she knew what happened because she was there, and that her stepfather did nothing at all to provoke the attack. Some animal activists argue that tragedies like this are caused by humans keeping wild animals in unnatural captivity and forcing them to work. The abuse toward captive elephants by their handlers is common and has been cited as one of the reasons the animals are known to turn on humans. While riding, cuddling with, or posing for a selfie with an exotic animal sounds like a good time, many warn that it's dangerous and that we should find ways to admire wildlife from a safe distance. Number 12. Tina Watson. In 2003, a newlywed couple, David and Tina Watson, celebrated their marriage with a honeymoon trip to Australia. Things took a tragic turn for the two from Alabama during a dive to a shipwreck where 26-year-old Tina went unconscious and plummeted 98 feet down to the ocean floor. David was a trained and experienced rescue diver, but he claimed that his wife sank too quickly for him to save her. He later said that an ear issue prevented him from diving any farther down than he did in his attempts to rescue Tina, at which point he surfaced and sought out help. By the time Tina was taken out of the water, she was long gone. Something seemed fishy. Witnesses told investigators that they saw David and Tina embraced in what looked like a bear hug underwater, while Tina flailed helplessly in an attempt to escape her husband's grasp. The onlookers said that David eventually let go of his lover, who had gone motionless, and resurfaced while she sank to the floor below. A few weeks after Tina's death, a tourist who was scuba diving nearby that day got their vacation photos developed and noticed Tina lying face up on the sea bottom in the background of some photographs. For a man who just lost his wife, David seemed unusually worried about money. He sued his travel insurance company when they refused to pay him, but he ultimately dropped the lawsuit to avoid self-incrimination. In 2008, Australian authorities officially charged David with Tina's murder. After resisting extradition from the US for over 6 months, he traveled to Australia to finally face the music in court. He was convicted of manslaughter and served a 1-year sentence inside an Australian prison. American authorities promised not to pursue the death penalty in exchange for David's return to the US, where he also faced a murder charge in connection to Tina's death. The case was dismissed based on a lack of evidence, but many are still convinced that David either killed Tina or at least knowingly allowed her to die when he had every opportunity to save her. Number 11. Marie de Dieu. Situated not far from the Kenyan coast in the Indian Ocean, the Lamu archipelago is incredibly popular among tourists as a tropical paradise. A 66-year-old wheelchair-bound French woman named Marie de Dieu was one of many who visited the site and quickly fell in love. She enjoyed her time there so much, in fact, that she actually became a regular visitor. But Marie's peaceful escape soon turned into a place of nightmares on a Saturday morning in October 2011, when a group of heavily armed Somali bandits busted into her rented bungalow on Manda Island and pulled her straight out of bed. Locals tried to stop the thieves but were helpless against a barrage of gunfire from the kidnappers as they put Marie in a boat without her wheelchair and sped away. Witnesses think that the criminals may have received a tip about Marie's location. They parked their boat right outside of her bungalow, suggesting that they decided to target her specifically. Kenyan authorities sprang into action in a frenzied attempt to save Marie's life. At one point, they almost caught up with the abductors by boat, but the criminals managed to outrun their pursuers, and they stayed at least one step ahead from that point on. 19 days after the kidnapping, the French government announced that Marie had been killed in captivity. The elderly woman's abduction came just 3 weeks after Somali gunmen barged into a British couple's oceanside villa south of the Somali border. They attacked David and Judith Tebbit under the cover of night in a similar fashion to how Marie's kidnapping was carried out. The pirates fatally shot David and held Judith hostage for 6 months until her family paid a large ransom. After her release, Judith told the BBC that she felt strangely uncomfortable upon the couple's arrival at the upscale resort. They were the only guests staying there at the time. This may have had something to do with the fact that British tourists were warned not to travel that close to the Somali border during a disturbing spike in violence against vacationers. At the time, the United States had also advised its citizens against traveling to the area. After Marie de Dieu's kidnapping, the French government also put out a travel advisory. The Kenyan government blamed the violence on a radical group called Al-Shabaab, which had several ties to Al-Qaeda and controlled a large portion of war-torn Somalia's southern region at the time. Kenya's tourism industry was hit hard as visitor numbers plummeted. Since then, the area that includes the Lamu Islands has gotten much safer, but visitors are still told to use caution and not to venture too close to the Somali border. Number 10. Evanis Harris. In May 2013, Evanis Harris took a trip to Honolulu, Hawaii to celebrate her 29th birthday. She decided to go with her boyfriend, Mark Miles Jr., and a female friend. The two women had complicated relationships both with Miles and with each other. They were each formerly prostitutes, and they were both in love with and romantically involved with Miles, who was basically their pimp. Naturally, their feelings for Miles developed some resentment between the two women, but at the same time they cared a lot about one another as close friends. One way or another, they made the strange arrangement work. Evanis secretly planned to stop working as a prostitute after her birthday. She wanted to start going to college and get her life back on track, and the Hawaii trip would be her last time working as a call girl. A few nights into the vacation, Evanis disappeared. Police initially took a closer look at the complicated relationship she had with Miles and the other woman. It sounded like a situation that could have easily turned ugly thanks to jealousy, but Evanis's friends insisted that wasn't actually the case. Surveillance footage from a bar in Waikiki showed her standing outside around 2 o'clock in the morning and speaking with a man who was later identified as a 38-year-old U.S. Marine sergeant named Nathaniel Cosby. At the time, Cosby was temporarily assigned in Hawaii. Investigators discovered more video from a nearby hotel which showed Evanis and Cosby going into an elevator together. During the next morning, Cosby was seen leaving the hotel with a large duffel bag, which he seemed to be struggling to get into his rental car. He returned a few hours later without the bag and carried on with his day like normal. Evanis was never seen leaving the room on any camera. 4 days later, her body was located inside the large duffel bag about 40 miles from Waikiki in West Oahu. Her remains were so decomposed that the medical examiner could only definitively conclude that she died from a neck injury. The bag seemed to match up with the luggage Cosby was seen leaving the hotel with hours after he took Evanis to his room. Cosby was later charged with murder and tried in a military court. He claimed that he killed Evanis in self-defense, but the court didn't buy that story. Cosby was convicted of murder while engaging in an inherently dangerous act and was handed a life sentence without parole. Authorities also charged Miles with violating the Mann Act. This makes it illegal to move a person across state lines for prostitution. While it's believed that Evanis worked as a prostitute by choice, Miles had broken federal law by acting as her manager. He pleaded guilty as part of a plea agreement and received a 3-year prison sentence. Number 9. Letta Lynn Cordes. When the marriage between Letta Lynn Cordes and her husband Frank became weighed down by cheating, personal losses, and other issues during the early 2000s, the couple decided to risk it all and build their dream vacation home on the Caribbean island of St. Martin. They had both had extramarital affairs in the past, and they hoped to escape the tensions that plagued their relationship by leaving their problems behind in California. After going home during a night of heavy drinking with friends in 2008, 49-year-old Letta decided that she wanted to visit a casino. She couldn't walk straight and was showing other telltale signs of intoxication, so Frank refused to let her drive there. Determined to keep the night going, Letta left for the slots on foot. According to Frank's version of how that night went, he decided that he wanted to make sure Letta got to the casino safely. He went out and started looking for her, but he couldn't find her anywhere. So he just assumed she was busy gambling and went home for the night. But Letta never actually made it to the casino, and she also never went home. She hasn't been seen since that night, despite large-scale searches being conducted, leading to what's been described as one of the strangest mysteries to ever happen on the island. Authorities suspected foul play, and the more they dug into the couple's personal lives, the more they started to narrow in on Frank as their primary suspect. While Letta and Frank had come to St. Martin with plans to fix their marriage, the couple allegedly still fought behind closed doors and hadn't ruled out getting a divorce. In the months leading up to Letta's disappearance, her friends had grown increasingly worried about her drinking and prescription pill abuse. Frank insisted that his fights with his wife had never turned physically violent, but investigators weren't convinced. He remained at the forefront of the investigation. Letta's friends also thought Frank was responsible for his wife's disappearance. Either way, for her to have vanished suddenly without a trace, something bad must have happened. More than 15 years later, Letta is still missing. At one point, Frank was arrested in connection to the case, but after keeping him in custody for 3 months, authorities didn't have enough evidence to keep him detained. He was released and has never been charged for Letta's disappearance. Number 8. The Esmond family. A family from Delaware became gravely sick during a trip to the U.S. Virgin Island of St. John back in early 2015 after a dangerous illegal pesticide was used to treat the property they were staying at. 4 days into their trip, Steve Esmond, his wife Dr. Teresa Devine, and their 2 teenage sons, Sean and Ryan, started having seizures. They were rushed to the hospital in bad shape and were ultimately airlifted back to the US for medical treatment. 4 of the emergency responders who helped transport the family to the hospital were also poisoned from the short amount of time they spent in the condo. Methyl bromide is an odorless substance that has been known to cause fatal respiratory and nervous system damage. It's banned for residential use, yet 2 Terminix employees used it to fumigate the apartment under the Esmonds' rented condo. The teens spent several weeks in medically induced comas. 6 months after the poisoning, they were conscious but could still hardly move. Before they got sick, both boys were highly athletic, and it was a big part of their plans for the future. Now, sports were no longer part of their plan. There was no way to predict if they would ever fully recover. There was a major chance that at least some of the damage was irreversible. Steve Esmond, who was a school principal before the incident, was left paralyzed, unable to speak, and unable to do basic things for himself. His wife Teresa, who worked as a dentist, suffered seizures but had the least severe long-term complications. The Esmond family won an $87 million payout in a lawsuit against Terminix over what happened. Authorities charged the manager of Terminix International St. Croix branch, Jose Rivera, for using the outlawed chemical. He pleaded guilty to 4 counts of improper use of a restricted pesticide. He was sentenced to spend just 1 year in prison. Number 7. Heather Mack. In August 2014, 62-year-old American socialite Sheila Von Wise Mack was staying at a 5-star resort in Bali when someone bludgeoned her to death. Sheila was with her pregnant daughter on the trip, 18-year-old Heather Mack, and Heather's boyfriend at the time, 21-year-old Tommy Schaefer. Leading up to her death, Heather was troubled, and the mother-daughter bond she and Sheila once shared was eroding quickly. Between 2008 and 2014, the police had been called to the family's home in Chicago at least 35 times. In one instance, Sheila told law enforcement that she was worried Heather might murder her. She still took her daughter on the luxury trip, though, perhaps hoping it would help them reconnect. During the trip, Heather used Sheila's credit card to buy Schaefer a plane ticket to join them and an overnight stay at the hotel, which came to a whopping total of $12,000. Within hours of Schaefer's arrival, a security camera caught footage of Heather, Tommy, and Sheila fighting in the hotel lobby. According to some reports, Tommy Schaefer killed Sheila shortly after that. He and Heather stuffed Sheila's body into a suitcase and loaded it up into a taxi while they tried to check out of their hotel. But by then, Sheila had warned the staff not to let Heather use her card, so they couldn't check out. Heather and Tommy left the scene on foot, leaving the bloody suitcase behind and prompting the taxi driver to notify the police. Authorities tracked the couple down at a cheap motel and arrested them on the spot. They both changed their stories multiple times during questioning, but investigators were confident that the pair was responsible for Sheila's death. They were both charged with murder, which often comes with the death penalty in Indonesia. Tommy Schaefer eventually admitted to being the killer, while Sheila confessed to helping stuff her mom's body into the suitcase, which she later denied. In court, prosecutors said that Heather and Tommy likely planned the murder out ahead of time, while exchanging text messages comparing themselves to Bonnie and Clyde. They also allegedly fantasized about how rich they would become after getting their hands on Heather's inheritance once Sheila was out of the picture. During his trial, Schaefer claimed that he killed Sheila after she berated him for getting Heather pregnant. He ultimately pleaded guilty to murder and was handed an 18-year sentence, while Heather took her case to trial. In April 2015, about a month after giving birth to her baby behind bars, Heather was convicted of murder and sentenced to 10 years. She was released early for good behavior in 2021 after serving only 7 years. The 26-year-old had plans to start a new life with her daughter, but she was deported to the US and quickly arrested by federal authorities. Her daughter was put in the care of a relative. Heather was charged with 2 counts of conspiring to commit murder in a foreign country and 1 count of obstruction of justice, which Schaefer will also face once he returns to the US after serving his sentence overseas. The young woman made it clear that she believed she served her time and that she didn't deserve to be prosecuted again on American soil. But she took a plea deal and admitted to 1 count of conspiring to kill a US national in exchange for a max sentence of 28 years in prison. As of July 2023, she is still awaiting sentencing. Number 6. Hannah Witheridge and David Miller. While on a backpacking trip in Thailand in 2014, 23-year-old British national Hannah Witheridge and her friend 24-year-old David Miller stayed on the island of Koh Tao. They wandered off after a late-night party on picturesque Sairi Beach and were discovered murdered along the shore the next morning, just steps away from their hotel room. Hannah had been brutally assaulted, while David sustained fatal blows to the head. Their killers left them to drown in the tide with the garden hoe and wooden clubs that were used to kill the pair simply laying on the beach nearby. Initial interrogations pointed detectives in the direction of migrant workers. They ultimately zeroed in on two 22-year-old men from Myanmar named Zaw Lin and Wai Phyo. The suspects confessed during questioning, but once they were given legal representation, they accused law enforcement of torturing them and took back their confessions. Thailand's National Human Rights Commission tried to investigate, but local authorities were unwilling to cooperate, and the trial against the defendants proceeded. Zaw Lin and Wai Phyo were charged with a long list of crimes, including premeditated murder, killing to conceal a criminal offense, illegally entering Thailand, and staying in the country without permission. Prosecutors argued that DNA connected the suspects to the crime scene, while the defense claimed the investigation was flawed and that evidence was mishandled. To this day, many find the DNA evidence shoddy at best. A panel of 3 judges found the men guilty of murder and sentenced them to death. Their sentences were later lessened to life in prison. Number 5. Elijah Snow. In 2021, Elijah Snow and his wife Jamie traveled all the way from Arlington, Texas to Cancun to celebrate their 10th wedding anniversary. The 35-year-old firefighter and father of 2 seemed to be in good spirits in photos that were taken not long after the couple's arrival at their resort around 10 a.m. on July 18th. Their room wasn't ready yet, so the staff gave them bracelets they could use to get free drinks at the resort while they waited. Elijah and Jamie spent the next few hours drinking and talking with other resort guests until their room was ready around 4:00 p.m. After dropping their luggage off, the pair went back out and kept drinking. They also had some drinks over dinner and afterward at the Oceanside Resort's bars. Shortly before 9:00 p.m., Jamie went to the couple's room to go to sleep, while Elijah said he would return soon. Around 4:00 in the morning, Jamie woke up and realized that her husband still hadn't come back. She searched around the resort, but couldn't find him, so she told security. After a few more hours went by with no sign of Elijah, Jamie called law enforcement. The missing vacationer was discovered dangling from the small window of an employee bathroom at a nearby hotel. He was dead. Authorities concluded that it was a freak accident and that Elijah suffocated to death while trying to squeeze through the small window. His loved ones theorized that he was mugged and stuffed into the window. They said it was totally out of character for Elijah to try breaking in somewhere, and after seeing his body, they believed his injuries were too extensive for this to be true. But their suspicions failed to convince law enforcement to investigate Elijah's death further. The only surveillance footage that was recovered showed Elijah pressing buttons at the elevator bank before stumbling toward a staircase. He was clearly drunk, and his family believes that more surveillance footage might have existed at one point. But police claimed that only some cameras were working, and the neighboring resort refused to hand over its security tapes. While authorities seem no more willing to investigate now than they were right after the tragedy, Jamie has filed a lawsuit against the resort and the travel agency she booked the trip through, accusing them of gross negligence. Number 4. Jessica Coker. A dream vacation turned into a horror story for a 39-year-old anesthesiologist named Jessica Coker and her husband Brian Melito during a romantic morning stroll along the coastline of Grenada back in 2016. The couple traveled to the Caribbean paradise less than a year after their wedding while making plans for the future, which included trying to start a family and opening up a small business. But that never happened for Jessica, who was suddenly dragged into the forest by a machete-wielding madman. Melita told police that the pair were simply walking along a pathway that ran through a mangrove when he heard Jessica call out his name. An enormous hulking man dressed in white was holding a blade up to her throat. As he dragged Jessica deeper into the forest, Brian followed in a panic. At first, he thought his wife was being taken hostage and that the kidnapper was going to demand a ransom. Jessica told Brian to run though, so he did. Just a little while later, police discovered Jessica's lifeless body lying face down next to a pond. She had been brutally bludgeoned and strangled to death. Witnesses quickly identified the suspect as 26-year-old David Benjamin, a local resident who lived close to the beach and who had been seen carrying a large blade around during the time of the abduction. Just a few months earlier, he had been released from prison after serving time for brutally assaulting another woman. Benjamin turned himself in to police the next day and was officially charged with murder. Brian Melito regretted listening to Jessica's order to run, but investigators concluded that he probably would have also been killed if he hadn't. Between being both unarmed and considerably smaller than the murderer, there was unfortunately very little Brian could have done to save Jessica without any extra help. Benjamin never revealed his motive for killing Jessica instead of releasing her like his previous victim. He pleaded guilty to murder and was handed the most severe punishment possible: life in prison with no chance at being released. At his sentencing, Benjamin showed absolutely no emotion or remorse whatsoever, even as the judge made him look at photos of the crime scene. For Jessica's loved ones, it was confirmation that the killer is now exactly where he should be. Number 3. Robin Gardner. During the summer of 2011, 35-year-old Robin Gardner told her boyfriend Richard Forrester that she was going to Orlando to see some family. While she was away, she called Forrester and said she was on a surprise trip to Aruba. In reality, she was actually visiting the island with her secret lover, a 50-year-old businessman named Gary Giordano. A few days into the luxurious vacation, she disappeared. She hasn't been seen since. According to Giordano's version of events, the two got caught in a riptide while snorkeling off a secluded beach. He managed to make it back to shore, but lost track of Robin during the panic. Giordano got help at a nearby restaurant, where witnesses noticed that he seemed strangely calm for someone whose companion had just disappeared under the waves. While a search for Robin was carried out, authorities quickly launched an investigation. They suspected that something terrible happened to Robin and that Giordano was likely responsible. During a search of his camera, they found images that they later described as beyond pornographic and declined to go into detail about the nature of the photographs. Witnesses who had seen the couple eating together earlier in the day of Robin's disappearance said that it would have been strange for her to go snorkeling afterward. She was all dolled up, and most women don't want to mess up their hair and makeup after spending considerable time putting themselves together. Robin's loved ones also thought Giordano's story was off. They said it was unlike Robin to go snorkeling at night, which was when she supposedly disappeared. Much like the witnesses who actually saw her that night, the missing woman's loved ones said it would have been more in line with her character for her to be dressing up for a night out on the town. The search for Robin was eventually called off after several days, and her fate remains a mystery to this day. When police caught Giordano trying to leave the country, they threw him in jail for about 4 months. But there wasn't enough evidence to continue holding him, and he was later released. Giordano has never been charged in connection to the case. Number 2. Orlando Moore and Portia Ravenel. In March 2019, Orlando Moore and Portia Ravenel traveled from Mount Vernon, a suburb north of New York City, to the Dominican Republic for a small mini-vacation. They rode horses, explored the local scenery, and made some friends at the Grand Bahia Principe Cayacoa resort where they were staying. By all appearances, the trip was a raging success. But when the couple never got on their flight back to New York, their families knew something was wrong. Orlando and Portia also didn't return their rental car and went radio silent on social media, raising even more cause for concern. For 2 weeks, loved ones frantically searched for answers and spread word of the couple's disappearance in hopes that someone with information would soon come forward. Finally, authorities released a statement claiming that the pair died in a car accident on their way to the airport. Officials said that Portia was located along a roadside that runs near the Caribbean Sea on the day of the accident. She had no identifying documents on her, so they didn't know who she was. The woman was immediately rushed to the hospital with severe injuries and died just 8 days later. Not long after the alleged crash, authorities recovered a body they believed belonged to Orlando Moore from the water about 13 miles from the accident site. The remains were heavily decomposed, but had a tattoo that matched a description of Moore. Police also said that fishermen spotted a submerged car, but that they were unable to retrieve it because of rough seas. The announcement about the discovery of the bodies left many people feeling confused and suspicious. The details were vague, and it just seemed like a bizarre story, but investigators concluded that there was no foul play involved and that the couple simply died in a tragic accident. Number 1. Amanda Waller. 28-year-old Amanda Waller vanished into thin air during a snorkeling excursion off of Curacao in 2015. She and her husband Alan traveled to the island from Houston, Texas, with a group of about 20 people who went snorkeling together off Casabao Beach. About 30 minutes into the trip, Amanda said she was going to swim back to shore to keep her pregnant friend company. Nobody knows if she ever made it to land, because that was the last time anyone ever saw her. Nobody noticed Amanda was missing until about 20 minutes after she said she was heading back to the beach. The group looked around for her, thinking she'd turn up eventually, but they soon realized that the situation was far more serious than they originally thought. After searching for just under an hour, the tourists decided to call the Coast Guard. As authorities and volunteers searched in and around the water, the vacationers made some missing flyers and started handing them out door to door. The Coast Guard search was called off after 72 hours, at which point Amanda's family would have to pay money for any more search efforts. After weighing the decision, Alan Waller decided that he had done everything in his power to find his wife, who was now presumed dead. In an interview with ABC 13 the next week, he said he didn't want to speculate on what he thought could have happened to Amanda, but that he truly believed she was now with God. Thanks for watching. Would you rather spend your tropical beach vacation rained out or arrive at your destination and learn that your luggage had been lost? Let us know in the comments below.